But generally, any toon who's slow at the game has to have something that makes it worthwhile that you're so slow. Like V can extract very fast, and she can see outlines of machines. Roger gets double research. What's Scrap's stick? Just tail whip the people. Well, that's not enough. Like, she's just there to be there. She's just very slow to be very slow. That's what makes Scrap so bad.
Right now, Scraps isn't that great of a toon. I mean, her stam is great, don't get me wrong, but like, that's about it.
But you definitely need a rework.
I'm sorry, Scraps. Poor Scraps, always down there.
Is Scraps redeemable? What are the sins of Scraps? Why does everyone agree that she's underwhelming? It's simple. Scraps has no major niche, nor does it have a role. Scraps is completely overshadowed by the other toons. If you didn't know, Scraps is one of my favorite toons in Dandy's world. But she has some issues that hold her back. Let's go over the benefits of playing Scraps. She has arguably the best skins in the game, and presumably more to come. She has an active ability, and that's pretty much all Scraps has over other toons. But that's okay, since I'll go over a build I found that you can do right now to play Scraps more effectively than my proposed changes that could improve on Scraps. But before I do that, I'll be going over Scraps' faults and my critique. Many players have noticed that Scraps is very underwhelming in terms of gameplay. They provide nothing notable that other toons can't do. Every other toon has something they're good at. Even Shrimpo is amazing at being bad. Scraps is so bad she can't even be good at being the worst toon. She comes second to that too. Scraps can't really do anything. Yes, she is playable, but for the most part she is tedious and boring. But why is this? It's because her stats. Although her stats may seem okay, it's actually quite nefarious. 5 stars in stamina, it looks good, and you know what? In early alpha she was one of the only non-main toons to have a 5-star stat. She was still outclassed but was unique because she was also the only toon with 5 stars in stamina at the time. But Dandy's world has gone through many changes since then. With every toon that is released, Scraps' stat distribution looks increasingly underwhelming by comparison. Most, if not all, toons are specialized to suit their own purpose. Meanwhile, Scraps struggles to have its place on a team. Her stats don't complement each other. The 2 in movement speed means she can't utilize her stamina. The 2 in skill checks means she can't extract well either, making the already mediocre extraction speed more sublime. Stats are an important part of the game. Depending on how stats are allocated, it determines how a character approaches situations and strategies. However, with Scraps there is no strategy. With her current stats distribution, she is not able to specialize into a role, and what is worse is that her strengths are completely overshadowed by her faults. There are optimal and non-optimal ways in distributing stats. A stat's increase or decrease being optimal or not optimal is determined by how those stat changes affect gameplay. We can think about stats like the means to an end. Thus, every stat has a purpose, and when we lower a stat to increase another stat, but the increased stat has been able to fulfill the role of the lower stat, then that is optimization. Let's use stamina and speed as an example. Stamina's purpose is the amount of time you have to run from a twisted. Speed is how successful you can run away from the twisted. If we had more speed and less stamina, it's like reducing the time we get from running away from a twisted, but in exchange, we get to be faster in the game, and also have a high likelihood of escaping twisteds. This is an example of optimization. We can also think about it like this. Our stamina is the gas to our car, and our movement speed is how fast the car can go. When a toon has a lower stat in stamina but is able to run faster, that would be good optimizing. It's like cutting down the size of our gas tank to our car and using the extra space for a bigger engine to go faster. Sure, a bit of optimizing is fine, but if you cut down too much, then it can become impractical. In Scrap's case, it's like you invested in a gas tank twice the size of your small car. This isn't to say that higher stamina is bad, but the stat distribution for it should make sense. Other toons that have high stamina usually have stats with higher movement speed. Just look at Sprout or Goob. They can distract if they wanted to. Scraps cannot reliably do that. She can't really do machines or kite, but you'd think there's still potential for something. On the Dandy's World Wiki, Scraps is considered to be a survivor-type toon. There's something all survivor types usually have, and that's 3 stars in speed, and sometimes it's higher stealth to avoid twisteds. Scraps has neither of these, and she struggles to avoid twisteds, and for a toon that is supposed to be a survivor type, that's really bad. We still haven't talked about Scrap's ability yet. Bad stat distribution isn't inherently bad, as long as there's something to justify it, like maybe a overpowered passive or ability for being unable to do basic things well. Scraps has this ability. This looks like a simple tool to get out of the way, right? Not a big deal. Wrong. I'll be explaining how this is yet another cruel joke on Scrap's existence. Scrap's ability is Crafty Grapple. She can pull herself towards another toon's position. This requires direct line of sight with 25 seconds of cooldown. So, instead of giving Scraps normal speed, she has an ability with a cooldown that has conditions. Scraps requires a friend to be around you and line of sight for mediocre mobility. But it's very situational, and after using your ability you are just slow again. At first it may not seem like an issue, but if your whole purpose as a toon is to survive but your base kit relies on a gimmick ability to do that, there's a problem. Scrap's ability requires line of sight, meaning if the toon she is targeting happens to move out of the way of her ability, Scraps will waste the ability. Thankfully, Scraps has had a buff to remedy this in the 0.4.0 update, but it's still not enough to make her usable. In order to play Scraps successfully, you need to play passive and walk a majority of the time so that you can expend your stamina avoiding twisteds. This is really slow and inefficient. I think we can now understand why Dandy World players find Scraps to be underwhelming. She can't really do anything and relies heavily on other toons for any sort of mobility. So does this mean Scraps is just completely useless? Well, the title of this video is Is Scraps redeemable? I believe she can be. Vmote is a no-brainer for any toon if you aren't going for specialized builds. You greatly support the team by completing a machine consistently. I won't be talking about moat, but rather, while I was play testing, I found out a trinket that made Scraps play pretty well when the right conditions were met. Although Scraps has a lot of shortcomings and underwhelming stats, we can still use trinkets to make her fit the survivor role and support the team. And as long as we are adapting our playstyle, Scraps can be played well. Even if the advantages Scraps has are small, we can still utilize it. You may have noticed I've been using Diary with Scraps. I'll explain why Scraps with Diary is actually pretty good. Diary is a weird trinket in Dandy's world. It's the only trinket that boosts stealth as of 0.5.2. Stealth is also just a weird stat in general, but that's a topic for a different video. Basically, a player's stealth value will determine how big a Twisted's range is when detecting a player. Higher stealth equals smaller detection range. Diary allows a 25% boost in stealth. This isn't enough to make toons using Diary have another star in stealth, but it is enough to decrease the detection range compared to other toons that don't have Diary or toons with lower stealth. As of now, only 3 toons have a stealth that is higher than 3, and that's Toodles, Cosmo, and Astro. When running Diary on Scraps, be aware that these toons still have more stealth. Diary's value drops a bit when playing with players with higher stealth, since you can't reliably use them to help get out of situations. I try to escape here, but since Cosmo has higher stealth, I'm still targeted. Using this principle, if we can get in a run where everyone has 3 stars in stealth or lower, we'll be able to avoid Twisted's easier by relying on teammates to take care of it. Instead of trying to make Scraps play as something she is not, we'll ignore the lower speed in favor of buffing stealth so that she can actually play as a survivor. We'll play into her strengths by relying more on teammates. Our teammates will help distract for us, and we will use our teammates to get around the map. Diary also allows us to hide from Twisteds and get out of their line of sight easier. So why stealth over movement speed? This entire video I've been complaining about Scraps' movement speed, which is still an issue, but our 5-star in stamina with Diary will accomplish what movement speed does, which is getting away from Twisteds. But with Scraps we also get the benefit of other things too. Something Diary has over other options is that the stealth helps protect you when you are using your ability on someone who has Twisteds on them. As long as that person doesn't have higher stealth or is about to turn a corner after you use your ability, you should be fine. Usually Pink Bowl and Vmote are used in tandem with Scraps, and that is arguably the best build. But with Pink Bow, you aren't able to use the ability as much as the person who has Diary. Using your ability just gets in the way, especially if someone is distracting. When using Pink Bow for more mobility, instead of using your ability as intended, wouldn't it just be better to play a different toon? Diary allows Scraps to separate themselves from other toons, especially Glisten. Glisten's 2-star stat in stealth wouldn't allow them to teleport to other Twisted safely. Another advantage Scraps has over Glisten is cooldown. 25 seconds cooldown makes Scraps a toon that shares one of the lowest cooldowns in the game. Comparing that to Glisten's monstrous 100 seconds cooldown, Scraps obviously has something to work with. By the time Glisten can use their ability again after cooldown, Scraps could have already used their ability 3 to 4 times over. Okay, there's one more thing we can do to make Scraps more playable. After completing a floor, if the next floor is an odd floor, then you'll be presented with the card vote. These cards determine the buffs you'll have on the floors to follow. The cards that you'll be trying to get as a Scraps player is the practice and rehearsal cards. Both of these cards have the same effect. They reduce cooldown by 5 seconds. Getting both of these cards can reduce Scraps' cooldown from 25 seconds to 15, making Scraps' cooldown even shorter, meaning we can use her ability for mobility as intended. The card vote won't always have these cards, but you can always try to wait for them. Getting it to appear isn't that hard. What is hard is everyone agreeing to vote for them. In this situation, it's fine because tech savvy is best for the team. However, if you want to get practice and rehearsal cards faster, it's better to play with players that also have active abilities.
There are good and bad ways to use diary. We aren't trying to make the game harder for our teammates. When we have twisteds on us, we can safely pull them back towards our distractor. Watch how I help. Redirect twisteds to Sprout. Here I got Twisted Toodles to go to Pebble instead of Brightney with the use of corners. Other toons with high stealth could also pull Twisteds towards our distractor, but they don't have Scraps' stamina or ability for flexibility. Another showcase of stealth being helpful. While I was playing, I noticed Sprout thanked me. I think this is the first time I've seen players happy with Scraps be a part of their run. Here is a passing tip with Scraps. Have good communication with the distractor to let them know you'll help get their twisteds. Open areas are your friends. Communicate to others that you'll need their help across big areas, and that's important because instead of relying on our own speed, we will use our ability on toons that are faster than us so that we get to places we want to go to. And with our high stealth, we'll be able to avoid twisteds. So we basically are able to focus on objectives with little to stop us and funky stats. You should use Scraps' ability when the elevators are opening and when it's closing. You should also use it to avoid twisteds if they happen to be near you, as well as enclosing gaps when needed. This Scraps build is unique, but it made me realize that Scraps could have a stat redistribution that looks different than just boosting her speed. I want to preface that even if Scraps weren't getting a rework, I still love Scraps. Playing Dandy's World doesn't always mean you have to play what's meta. Sometimes you can just play what you like, and that's respectable. No matter if Scraps is left alone or changed, I will still play them because they're my favorite. And despite my criticisms, Dandy's World is surprisingly a really balanced game. Scraps isn't completely unusable, they just need a bit of help. With that said, let's go over changes that could help them out. Ideally, we would want to take the star from stamina and move it anywhere else. But I feel like that's a change that would also change what Scraps is as a character. I think removing the star from extraction or skill check and in favor of buffing Scraps' stealth would make more sense than lore-wise. Scraps' claws get in the way of her extraction. Scraps assumes the identity of a cat, and cats are known for being stealthy.
I think boosting Scrap's stealth makes sense with the context of her character, and it would also be helpful to make them function as a proper survivor.
Imagine the benefits I went over with Diary, but it's built into Scrap's stats. It would leave room for more builds that could help Scraps focus on more things than just being able to play the game. Although I would prefer stamina going down to 4 for the stealth increase. I think if it came down to it, lowering skill checks would make sense, and it would make Thinking Cap a viable option for some Scraps players. An interesting prospect. I'm aware not everyone will agree with my line of thinking, so I'd like to see what you guys think about my proposal and what you would like to see changed with Scraps. There is a likelihood Scraps will get a rework as seen in this message by Quell. A rework isn't just stat redistribution, but also changes to an ability. Quell mentioned this, and I think Scraps latching to machines is better than nothing. Realistically, any buff to aid Scraps' ability would help a lot. I like what Muleta suggests as a change for Scraps. I think what holds Scraps back is the requirement of a friend to use the ability. Any of these changes to Scraps' ability would be great. I think to really make Scraps good would be making the cooldown even lower. If Scraps relies on her ability for mobility instead of movement speed, I think it makes sense that it should be able to substitute movement speed, maybe by reducing the cooldown by another 5 seconds. I could yap about Scraps forever, but I want to know what you guys think could help Scraps, and changes you would like. What ideas did you like and what changes would you do differently? I would love more Scraps discussion. And with that being said, have a great new year and thanks so much for watching.